All right, so let's continue with studying the sets of numbers. For those of you that have young children or maybe niece or nephew, if you ask them to start counting, they're going to say 1, 2, 3, and they're going to go on. So the counting numbers start at 1, and you know what? When you ask someone what are the numbers, it's only natural that you would start at 1. 1, 2, 3, 4. So the set of natural numbers include the positive integers starting at 1 and continue on up. Now the way we're going to remember the whole numbers, the set of whole numbers, is see that O in the word whole? That's going to remind us that 0, because that O in a whole is going to remind us of 0. That 0 is included in the set of whole numbers. So the set of whole numbers is 0, 1, 2, 3, and on and on and on. So these are our positive integers, and 0 is also an integer. Let's talk about integers. Integers include all the positive natural numbers and the negative of the natural numbers. In other words, there are no decimals and they're not written as fractions. So 0 is an integer, 1 is an integer, 2 is an integer. But so are the negative integers, -1, -2. 0 and all of the negative integers and all of the positive integers. Integers do not have any decimals, and you do not usually write them as fractions, but if you were to write them as a fraction, they'd have a 1 in the denominator. So the integer 3, if you had to write it as a fraction, would be 3 in the numerator, the number on top, over 1. 1 is in the denominator. Okay, so the integer -2 would be -2 over 1. But you know what? There are many numbers like between 1 and 2 or between 0 and 1 that might be represented with decimals or as fractions. So the next category or set of numbers are rational. Now when you hear the word rational, don't think like sane or insane. Think of the word to ration out or ratio. Imagine you give your friend 3 of the 8 pieces of pizza. Okay, you're rationing out parts of a whole. Rational numbers. So rational numbers, if they are written as fractions, have an integer in the numerator. That's the number above the fraction bar, and an integer in the denominator. A rational number, if it's written as a decimal, the decimal will either terminate, which of course means stop, or it will repeat. So repeat either the same digit or the same 2 digits or the same 3 digits over and over again. So let's look at some examples of rational numbers, like the number 1/2. 1/2 is a rational number. If we were to put it on a number line, it would be between 0 and 1. But if it's represented at a fraction, the integer 1 is over the integer 2. But if we were to write that as a decimal, that would be 0.5. That would terminate. Let's have another example here of a fraction. Let's say that we had 1/3. Also a rational expression because there's an integer in the numerator and an integer in the denominator. But if we were to write that as a decimal, it's decimal 33333. That 3 is repeating. And just as a reminder, let's say I had 5 over 1. That's really the integer 5, but if I wanted to write it as a fraction, it would be 5 over 1. And if I had to write it as a decimal, it would be 5.0 with no numbers other than 0 after the decimal place. So those are your most common numbers. Now, a number is either going to be rational or irrational. They're mutually exclusive. Either a number is rational or it's irrational. It's rational or it's not. An irrational expression is one that, if it's a fraction, cannot be represented as an integer over an integer. Or more likely, we're going to see it as a decimal. It does not terminate and it does not repeat. And it's pretty easy to pick out irrational numbers because typically they are very odd math symbols, like pi. Pi on your calculator would be 3.142, and it would go on, and it would not repeat, and it would not terminate. There's also an expression in math, E, for exponential, 2.17, and on. So it should be easy to pick out your irrational numbers. They don't look like the other numbers. Most of what we're going to see are rationals. And then finally, the last set of numbers are the set of real numbers. And everything we're going to do in Math 096 is with real numbers. There are such a thing as imaginary numbers. They're not real. They're imaginary numbers, but we won't get into that until you get into Math 098. All right.